Welcome to the Bowhunter Podcast. All bow hunting, all the time. Now, here's your host, editor Christian Berg.
All right, welcome back to the Bowhunter Podcast. We are all bow hunting all the time. It is October, deer season's here. It is an awesome time to be a bow hunter, pretty much anywhere across North America. And I am pumped up. I finally got out. I actually missed opening weekend of archery season here in Pennsylvania this past weekend. I was out of town with the wife. I know I've got my priorities all out of whack, but we got home about 4 o'clock Monday morning. I headed out for the first hunt of the season on Monday afternoon, and I filled an antlerless tag. So I have punched some lungs. I've got some meat in the freezer, and now I can focus on antlers, and I've taken the pressure off and can continue to strive for greatness this season. And speaking of greatness, I've got a guy here with us today that I'm really excited about. It's Derrick Dixon. Derrick has been lighting the world on fire with his brand new venture called Whitetail Research. And this guy is using drones to do some absolutely amazing things in the whitetail world. Derrick, thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Christian.
Derrick, you're out in Missouri, correct?
Yes, Southern Missouri. So kind of like all the research I've done has been in the Ozark Plateau kind of region. So northern Arkansas, southern Missouri.
Yeah, and so, gosh, if you know, a lot of people I imagine are familiar with you because you've literally been just blowing up on your own YouTube channel, other podcasts, articles, online articles, lots of stuff. Probably like over 1 million views all told on your videos at this point, huh?
Yeah, I think that I'm pretty close to that. I haven't looked as of recent, but I know that my first video I posted, it's got 320 something thousand on its own. So it's been doing way better than I ever thought that it would.
So, you know, for all of you who are listening or watching today, this is perfect timing because, you know, we're going to dive in and Derrick's gleaned a lot of insights from watching, you know, deer, but particularly mature bucks with his drones and just kind of analyzing, you know, what they do and why they do it. But before we dive into all that, I do want to lead, you know, with the fact that you are a very avid bow hunter, Derrick. And I know because we talked a little bit when we set this up, you've been chasing some pretty big deer out there and you've already had some good encounters this fall with the bow in your hand.
Yeah. No, I've been going out to actually an ag property, which, believe it or not, there are a couple in southern Missouri. They're all bordered with a little bit of kind of terrain diversity and some hills and whatnot. But down in the creek bottoms, you can find ag land. And these ag properties, they, especially during the drought, they're pulling in just an unreal amount of deer. And I haven't gone back and hunted in, I guess, about a week and a half now. But there at the beginning of the season, I was going out very consistently because, I mean, scouting this property is as easy as it could be. You'd just go sit out on the edge of the field and wait for all the deer to funnel into the soybeans. There's over 150 deer that walk into it. And it's like, just pick the one with antlers that you kind of like, watch where he came from and start connecting dots as to where, you know, how he's getting from point A to point B, and then try to intersect that. So on opening day, we tried to intersect that. And, we failed pretty miserably. Me and my friend, he had a camera, and we had set up further down this fence row. We were going to try to pick off this one particular mainframe 8, really old deer. And we had a group of like 10 does come out behind us. As soon as he was coming out down the tree line, he was walking towards us, and they blew the entire field. And from that moment on, all of the deer, whenever they come into that corner, now they're all extremely suspicious. So they're creating this kind of like this birth around that location, knowing that something has happened right there, and they're very, very concerned about it. So we kind of like try to readjust and move further down the fence line or further back off the fence line, trying to figure out where to be. And I've come within, I mean, that's where a lot of the close-up videos I've been putting in my videos as of recent have come from, is because I've been getting within 50, 60 yards of mature bucks every single time I go. is it's not that you know where they're coming from. They're going to come out and they're going to browse this entire time frame, but it's just getting within the proper range to take a shot on one. And you could fling an arrow 50 yards on these deer on ag. I mean, everything's flat, wind's pretty calm. The issue is getting your bow drawn back also without even being detected, because you've got 20 does within 20 yards of you sometimes, and they're all just standing there kind of a little bit semi-suspicious. Maybe the thermals swirl for a second and they pick up a scent of something, and they're kind of looking at the woods trying to decipher what they just picked up, and they're always on edge. And it's like you really want one to be a little bit closer in that situation. And yeah, no, I wasn't able to close the deal, so I'm a complete failure at the beginning of season. Yeah.
There's nothing, we all wish, like, for people in a lot of areas of the country, the idea of having like this magical soybean field with 150 deer on it every night seems like nirvana. But as you just kind of, referenced, that's not necessarily as easy to hunt as people think. And nothing like starting your season by like blowing out the field and now
Yeah.
making your job harder for the whole rest of the fall,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, no, our best chance was that first day, and those does, they came out of the worst location. I don't even know where they were bedded, because I kind of knew that area prior to from scouting and just observing where they were coming from and walking into the field, and not a single deer had walked into this location where we had set up. And I mean, they walked out 30 yards back behind us, exactly where the wind was blowing, and everything's kind of falling down into that drainage where they were standing. And it's like, well, there you go, we're screwed. So they picked us up pretty quick.
Well, the deer have a real nasty habit of doing what we don't
Yeah.
want them or expect them to do. Yesterday, case in point, I was out again. I set up, we had a south wind. There was a big cold front that moved in last night. So had a south wind. There was rain moving in. I was in a stand about 10 yards into the woods on the edge of a cornfield. There was bedding down below me. And then the wind was carrying all my scent out into the corn. And I was like, this will be perfect. These deer will be coming to the corn, at the evening, and they'll be moving ahead of this cold front. And man, it's going to be a great setup. Well, where the hell were all the deer, Derrick? They were already in the corn 2 hours before dark when I got there. I had one big doe and a fawn came right out along the edge of the cornfield and walked the edge until they hit my scent stream. She blew and they ran down into the woods below me. And then I didn't see any more deer until it got dark. And after I climbed down, I had to walk along the edge of that cornfield to get back to my e-bike. And when I got almost down to the bottom corner of the field, there was a deer standing along the edge, and then it ran into the corn. And then I heard all these other deer running around in the corn, breaking stalks, running back up the hill. I was like, well, they were
Yeah.
already, it just,
Yeah. They'd
you
been
know,
there.
they just,
Yeah.
whatever. So, and this is a good transition, honestly, to whitetail research, because again, we talked about this. So, you're learning a lot. But there's knowing like what the deer are doing in a pristine environment, and then there's what did the deer do when you actually go out there and try to hunt them, because your presence changes everything. So
Yeah.
we're going to get into all that, but before we do, again, I think I got to give you an opportunity to even just let you tell everybody who isn't familiar, like, what is Whitetail Research? How long has this thing been going on, and what are you doing?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, Whitetail Research kind of formed in this idea that I had in 2019, where um, essentially a thermal attachment for a camera had came out, and I'd seen it, and then immediately realized you could probably find deer with that, and start researching them at that level. And then kind of, from that moment on, I started documenting stuff. But really the seed was planted, but I wasn't that far along in my thought process. I just started kind of documenting ideas with it. And then at some point, drone deer recovery, people recovering deer with thermal drones came out, and I saw that and was like, hey, somebody's actually using this application in a way to make money, but in a really good way. It seemed pretty interesting, but no one was doing research still. And then 2022, the Matrice 30T came out. Somewhere around there was whenever also deer recovery came out. And that drone could do everything that I could ever dream of. You could drop a pin like a GPS collar can, drop pins for you. You can flip on a zoom camera and count the points on top of deer's heads. You can potentially even look at their body and their characteristics and the way that they move around and try to age them off of that, versus just a trail cam picture. And And yeah, and you can also observe with the thermal camera and wide camera, the deer that he's moving around, and just analyzes his entire environment. And from there, whenever I saw that drone, I became very, very heavy into it. And whenever I worked a technology job. I was an IT guy at a school for 5 years. Um, while I was there, those last kind of 2 years that I was working there, I probably spent more time documenting stuff in a Google Doc for video ideas and just all these massive pitches for research that I was going to do. And I also developed my own kind of Google spreadsheet that was all automated. So that way, pretty much all of the variables that I was wanting to document, they would around 30 to 50 of them. They were all just automated every single day per deer per county, whichever county that deer was going to be located in. So in total, I recorded around 44 deer, and of those 44 deer, they were in variable counties. So dependent upon county, I was trying to pull all of the weather variables for that particular one, because sometimes in Missouri weather is ridiculous. So, my county can get rain, and the county right next to us, they don't. It's just blaring sun the entire time, and it's 10 degrees warmer. So I was wanting to try to capture all of that, dependent upon which county I was doing research in. But yeah, no, I started in 2024 was whenever I was mutually fired from my job. It was kind of like an agreement. Me and my boss were pretty good friends, and he had seen like, you need to go do your own thing type situation. So he had actually called me while I was on paternity leave with my wife for my second child, and he informed me that he was going to be releasing me. And we talked about it, and it was kind of like a good luck situation. Go fulfill your dream. So I'd walked inside, and then I told my wife as soon as we got home with our new baby that I'm going to go out and I'm going to spend blank amount of dollars, not a cheap drone particularly, on this new drone, and we're going to move back home. I just got fired. Like, this is going to become the dream. And she was just kind of like, okay, like I guess that sounds pretty crazy. So, but let's, I mean, why not? Let's do it.
Where were
So
you? Where were you at the time? Like, were you in a different state or just far
yeah,
from where you
I was
grew
I
up?
was in a different city. I was living in Springfield, Missouri. I mean, for
Hmm.
reference, I don't mind saying where I was at then, and it was just a much larger city. I kind of hated it, like a lot of people that live in right inside big cities were, and I wanted to get out. There's not a lot of public land right around that area either in Springfield, Missouri. All the public land it's either really small that's nearby it, or it's really far away, and to get to actually like Mark Twain or something like that. And that made it really hard to hunt while you were up there as well, unless I wanted to drive all the way back down to kind of my hometown where I had re-access to public land, and then also all the private properties that I've always had access to. So it made hunting in general really difficult, or just going and getting out in the woods pretty difficult, just because there's not a lot of outdoor opportunities in that area. So
Yeah.
anyways, relocated back to my hometown where I had access to private properties to do research on. I didn't do any research on public land. I'd love to, but there's a couple stipulations with that. In Missouri, you have to apply for waivers to be able to fly on public. In addition to that, anyone can be walking on public, and in some portions of the season, they might have a weapon. And I'm flying a big, suspicious drone in the sky, so I wouldn't put it past somebody to fling some lead at that thing.
You
Which
didn't want to like lose your really
yeah,
expensive drone, right?
I did. Yeah, I didn't want to lose it. I would fully understand if somebody flung a shot at the thing. So I tried to focus on private land, and then if I had access to a private piece of private land, I would kind of go out to all the neighboring properties and verify with them that I have their blessing to not shoot the drone out of the sky, because I'm just doing research, etc. And yeah, so from 2024, June of 2024, I started flying all the time, and that became my full time job. And then I flew all last season, and I entered it with the mentality that I was going to be tracking mature bucks in particular for as long as I possibly could. There really wasn't. There were some little topics, like micro topics, that I could hit on, like, are deer bedding on the leeward side of this ridge, and like these kind of basic questions that you can enter in, trying to pull out with all the data that you can collect. But for the main portion of it, I was just trying to collect as much data as I possibly could on mature bucks, and then I was just going to figure it out after. Like, basically, just continue to collect data, drive yourself insane with how much time you're spending out there, and then at the end of season, whenever everything's wrapped up and done, then come back. And that's why it took until June. My season ended January 15th, but it took until June for me to make a video, because all throughout that time I was serving as my own statistician. I was going back and I was relogging and I was re-verifying and I was automating portions in the spreadsheet to kick out different metrics like yards per hour for a particular deer, or morning net displacement versus evening net displacement for all of my deer, all these different things that I was wanting to be able to see. It took me a while to do that, just because I was kind of learning it as I went. But yeah, and then in late June was whenever I posted my first video. So it actually took me a year. I had been flying the drone and doing research for a year until I posted my first video on YouTube.
Gotcha. So you posted your first video in June of 25 here, and it's really been kind of a wild ride since, huh?
Yeah, pretty much wild ride ever since. So
How
yeah.
how have you so how have you been feeding yourself? So you got fired, you left your job and you've been doing this, like you said, you dropped a bunch of money on
Yeah.
the drone, and you've been doing all this work, kind of like laying the foundation. I mean,
Mhm.
how are you getting by?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the beginning phases, I was living off of kind of savings, and then I was also being pretty savvy with the stock market. I'm a mildly intelligent person, so I can play that game. And then in addition to that, I still would go out and do little tiny odd-ended jobs. Like for reference, I had a thermal drone, so I could go out and I could do these MISC styled of real, roofing inspections type jobs, or I could do drone deer recovery. I think I did 8 or 9 times. I've done a couple property analyses. I've also, prior to moving out to Springfield, I was into construction, so I did some framing for some guys. I helped roof a couple houses. Like I was just doing any odd-ended things where I could kind of plug myself in for a couple days at a time, so that way I wasn't spending all of the time possible doing that. But most of that stuff that I'd done related to construction and whatnot, I was trying to pile all of that right before season. So that way, whenever I made it into season, I could spend as much time as possible going out and doing research. And then in some situations where, like, say, in the early season, like even right now, where we have foliage on the trees, I would go out and I would locate a mature buck early in the morning when thermals were good. And if I flew and I lost him anywhere throughout the middle of the day and I had to stop tracking just because the foliage was so bad, and basically I would fly back to swap out batteries, and then I would fly up in the air and I would try to relocate him. If I couldn't relocate him within 30 to 45 minutes, I would just kind of have to stop and go home. And in that situation, I would always try to go and find something to do. So I'm looking for, kind of connecting back to these guys, like if they needed help framing on whatever, or laying a roof down on something, laying some shingles, like anything. I was just trying to go out and, yeah, so pretty much hustling pretty hard, trying to um, fulfill the dream with Whitetail Research, while simultaneously, like, yeah, I have 2 kids and a wife, so I need to put food on the table. So
So yeah, I mean, Derrick is a fascinating, guy, and obviously this is a multifaceted dude. He's a smart guy. He knows how to, hunt, but also use technology, and probably ought to get some stock tips from him before we finish today's show. But let's dive into the mature buck research, because that's obviously what everybody is interested in. I mean, heck, I even think, obviously, as we started the show, I was talking about how we're in season now, and we're kind of like, what's today, the 7th of October, the 8th? I
it's
don't
the
even
eighth.
know, but the
Yeah,
8th.
it's the eighth.
Okay. So, we're kind of heading into that, a little bit of a slower period, I guess you'd say, the October lulls, call it.
Mm,
And because, like, I got a lot of does, lighting up my trail cameras, but all those bucks that I had all summer and into early fall have kind of gone dark. You know what I mean? And
yeah.
I just think, like, wow, how awesome would it be if I had a few thousand extra bucks and I could be like, Derrick, let me fly you out here to Pennsylvania. I would love to have you just go up
Mhm.
with your drone over at this farm where I hunt and find these darn bucks. Where the hell are they? What are they doing? And
Yeah.
that's kind of like what you do, right?
Yeah, it'd be really cool if somebody'd make a video on the October lull in relation to what they're actually doing. And that's a pretty good video idea. If only I was coming out with that in a couple weeks. Yeah. But yeah, no, I mean, it is fascinating. Like right now at the main property that I did research on last season, I think there's 18 trail cameras on it, that are all running, and they're actually out there serving a purpose. They're going to be utilized for research going into the future, not just for anyone that's hunting the property. Which thankfully most of the guys that hunt that property, they just go sit in a tower on the first 2 days or 3 days of rifle season, and then they climb up, climb down, and then that's the end of their season. So it's an extremely low pressure property. That main that main property I've done research on, it's very, very low pressure in relation to, a lot of people's standard stuff. The only guy that had ever bow hunted it really was me, and then I had a cousin that did, for a while, but he's kind of been around enough time to be able to do that for a long time. But anyways, yeah, no, on that particular property though, same thing. All of a sudden, all the mature bucks started disappearing off the trail cameras. Had a lot of pictures of them, kind of in the beginning of the season, and now they're all gone. And kind of fascinating. The main portion of that property, it's almost 90% timber, and then there's little fields kind of pocketed throughout it. But on the north section and on the south section, there are kind of some larger open fields that are just full of native grasses, and they're really good, kind of good for nothing, not really used for anything, just fields that exist. But those fields also have large mature oak trees kind of hanging out inside of them, and a lot of them are right on the field edge as well. And what I've seen, it's kind of interesting, right in this time frame of October, it's not uncommon to see 40 deer kind of lingering out on the corners of these fields and then piling underneath these large mature oak trees for like a couple weeks throughout the early section of October. And oftentimes whenever I track them, specifically a mature buck, they're bedding within 200 yards, 250 yards of that main kind of ridiculously large feed tree, if you want to call it. And if you think about it from the perspective of acorns in themselves, I mean, in big mature timber, those trees, they're forced with a lot of competition. Their canopies are very minimalized. Their canopies are kind of funneled all the way up at the top if all you have is mature timber. And then you get out into these big open fields, and they can put on tons of limbs all the way down, to the bottom of their trunk. And they're just putting on this really high massed quantity of acorns. They're also not in any competition for nutrients. They're not as nutrient deficient. Sometimes if they're out in a field edge, they're kind of maybe put in a section where they're next to a drainage or right at the bottom of a drainage, or maybe there's a little bit of a bowl kind of in that area, and those areas are going to collect water a little bit better. So therefore that tree that it not only doesn't have any sunlight competition, doesn't have any nutrient competition, it's just out there putting on the highest quantity of acorns, probably the best tasting acorns for
I,
whitetail deer. I
I,
can't verify or deny that, and that's where they're going to be in my area, at least right now.
well, it's funny. I mean, as you're talking, I'm like, my gosh, I can think of this giant white oak on the farm that I hunt, and it's exactly what you said. It's right on the edge of the field, and so it gets that sunlight like you talk about, and it doesn't have the competition because this tree, a lot of the big limbs are growing out over the field, but it's such a big tree. It's like 100 and some feet tall. It's a big mature
Yeah.
white oak. So it's not, interfering with the farmer's access or anything, but that thing rains down acorns this time of year. And interestingly, it's at the head of a ravine, and it drops down, and there is like moisture down in there. And also I just know that the deer bed down in there because you can't, it drives me nuts because I love it and I hate it because you can't really hunt it. You can't hunt the head of that ravine because the prevailing wind is northwest, and
Hmm.
your scent's just going to go right down in there, and every deer that's down in there is going to know that you're there. If you try to hunt the other side of it, you can do that, but the deer are probably not coming up on that side near as much
Hmm.
as they're coming up on the side that
Yeah.
you want to hunt. But anyway, I should probably move one of my cameras. I should
Yeah,
put it on a stake out there in the field and just point it under that tree, huh?
I would highly recommend it. Yeah. No, and I mean, in some situations, like say you've been hunting, I don't know your property, but let's just theorize that you have a large cornfield, like you said that you're nearby.
Well, yeah, and
Um,
this oak, yeah, there's
it's
corn and beans out to right where this oak
yeah.
tree is too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I've looked at some of these ag properties, the Southern Missouri ag properties, I'll call them, and some of them do have pretty decent stands of soybeans, and one or two had corn. The corn's already been chopped though, but deer are still entering into those fields for at least a couple weeks right after they were chopped. And specifically the soybeans though, soybeans, especially since this year we had kind of like a drought season. Um,
Hmm.
they were
Definitely.
really really palatable there for a while, and that's why I was seeing right in early September or mid September, 150 plus deer every single day, just funneling into there. And if you go back today, I haven't, but I would almost on this particular property, but I have on others. I would almost guarantee you that number is probably less than a third, maybe less than a fourth of the amount of deer walking into that spot. And especially, I don't really care about does. I don't care what they're doing, but especially mature bucks. Whereas in the past, I was seeing 10 to 15 4-year-old plus class bucks that were all walking into this area. Now I guarantee you that you're only seeing maybe 2, maybe 3 at most, but probably close to 2, 1 or 2 every single evening. They're going to be moving into that area. And that's because obviously their velvet is shedded, testosterone's rising, therefore they're going to start splitting. They're not going to all be funneling into the single food source anymore. And there are other soybean fields throughout the area, but those soybeans are maturing and they're becoming slightly less palatable. And we're in the Midwest, and they're going to have to deal with a harsh winter that's coming up. And there's acorns dropping, and acorns having extremely high fat content. So why not move to the oak trees, especially if you're a mature buck? You can still find does in the soybeans going for maybe a couple more weeks, and these old standing soybeans that are just not as digestible, but they're still better than all the other native browse that's around. But in particular, mature bucks that are all gearing up with that higher raising staking testosterone coming up into the pre-rut, they're seeking out something that can pile on more fat. And that's the whole reason why they all moved to acorn trees. And that's why a lot of times they disappear off of cameras, because if you had your cameras in this location and they're all feeding kind of in this native grass area, maybe you have a summer food plot, or maybe you're on beans or something like that, and then all of a sudden they just disappear. It's because they've disappeared to where there's oak trees, and likely oak trees are pretty close to timber, and they're bedding inside of the timber, and they're not moving further than 250 to 350 yards. So you have to find that particular range of oak trees that they're going to be browsing on. And that's why if you're in
Well,
big
yeah,
timber, no, you can go.
that's what I think. Like, it's there's a decent amount of woods and ag in my area. So then the question becomes, like, it's not a matter of, are there any oak trees dropping acorns? There's lots of oak trees dropping acorns. So how do I figure out which ones? And assuming they're even on the property, right? Because another problem we run into, here in the East is properties aren't that big. So those deer that you may have had on camera pre-season or early season may actually be on a neighbor at this point. And then even if you can find out where they are, can you hunt it? Because like you said, if they're bedding pretty close, can you get in? Can you get out? Now you're starting to deal with all those real world problems, entry and exit
Yeah.
routes and wind and man, it's tough, which is why
Yeah.
everybody is gobbling up your videos. And I can't wait for this next one that you've teased out.
Yeah. No, I mean, in my opinion, this time frame is probably one of the hardest times to hunt. The easiest time to hunt would have been a couple weeks ago, kind of, that September
Yeah,
15th all the way until,
before, which is why,
before this
Pens-
random transition has taken place. But now that the transition has happened, we've entered a very difficult state. And then as soon as that pre-rut starts ramping up, which is coming in quicker than a lot of people think, then that's whenever it's a great time to get back in the woods. And another thing, by the way, is that's going to get talked about in that video is a lot of people still focus their hunting time in this early time frame, in the evening. That's like that's their number one time frame, that they're all going out and trying to pick off, because it's kind of that same mentality as to the early, in that September time frame for my area, where deer, they're only going out and they're only browsing in the evening, and they don't really have that much activity in the morning. But you're not getting pictures of them in the evening either, so you don't have a clue what they're doing. And from what I can see with the thermal drone, they're just as active in the morning right now as they are in the evening already. And in some cases, they're actually potentially more active in the morning than they are in the evening. And you can depict that based off of temperature. If you're going to have a cooler morning, and that morning temperature is going to last a lot longer, all the way to 9:30, and it's going to stay, like for my area right now, it's above 85 degrees. It's like 90 degrees almost outside. But this morning it was probably in the 70s. And that 70s, it may have lasted in the 70s all the way until almost 9 a.m. So it would have been a pretty good idea to been hunting this morning versus in the evening. The temp's not going to drop off until the last 30, 45 minutes of light. And you're really kind of funneling down that time frame where there's going to be a peak activity of movement. Whereas in the morning, there was actually a lot of activity this morning. So
yeah, that's pretty interesting. And I mean, it's amazing what you're learning, just, like you said, some of it just cuts against conventional wisdom. I don't even want to go any farther. I want you to like tease your not tease, but just share like your YouTube channel, like, because people are already like, all right, where can I go watch this guy's videos? So where can I go watch this guy's videos?
yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it's Whitetail Research across the board. That's kind of and actually, if you Google me now, I'm the first one that pops up at the top. So I think that means I've officially made it, and I am now Whitetail Research. So But yeah, and I have Instagram, YouTube, Patreon actually for some extra stuff on the Patreon. I've only posted one video there, but it's a 40-minute video of me breaking down hill country and in an ag property. It's a pretty cool video. But yeah, I mean, that's where everything is. And I think I only have 6 videos at the moment. The issue with it is the fact that I'm kind of the one that goes out and collects all the stuff. And then I'm my own statistician. And then I'm also my own video editor and the effects editor and the audio engineer. Like I'm kind of everything. So it makes it a little bit more difficult for me to kick out a video at the quality that I want to kick one out. So I could start kicking out low quality videos pretty quick if I wanted to. But I'm kind of geared in the mindset of quality over quantity in that mindset. So yeah, it takes me a little bit to get videos out.
Well, and the thing is, it'll just, as it continues to evolve, right? At some point, you'd probably need a little more manpower, and yeah, you could create, some short teaser clips for videos and things like that. But like you said, your time is limited, so that would only probably that'll make it even longer for you to get a video out.
Yeah.
But so yeah, check out Whitetail Research, and let's kind of next thing I want to talk to you about is just the process of like the amount of time that you spend watching individual deer. Cause I think that's probably what kind of got the original. I was probably one of your first videos, and it seems like that's been what generated a lot of buzz, is that you basically identified, some individual mature deer, or, trophy type deer, that we'll call it. And you literally would just watch these things like for hours and days and weeks, and learn like everything you possibly could about this deer, as if you were like if we were doing this in the human world, we'd call you like a creepy stalker, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's exactly what I would have been. Yeah, no, I mean, in total, I think I've spent the amount of data that I've collected and logged on mature bucks, in total hours spent watching was 2,150 ish. I think it's a little bit over that number.
How many
Hours.
days is that, Derrick? I know
Uh,
you figured it out.
yeah, I haven't figured it out. I can figure it out real quick. I think it's like over 30 days. I don't remember. 50 divided by 24. It says it's 89 days, 89 and a half.
So that's almost 3 months. So it's basically like if you could
Yeah.
watch a mature buck 24/7 for 3 months straight, you'd know a
Yeah.
few things.
Yeah, you know a few things, but I mean that was spread out over a pretty long period of time as well. And a lot of time, a lot of it was really spent during kind of that daylight time frame, with a couple hours on either end of the morning and the evening. So it wasn't like I was out there spending 24 hours, 24 hours, 24 hours, because that's kind of impossible. But anyways, then the deer that I'd researched the most was one. He was a mainframe 10. He's been featured in my second video. In that second video, I named him Winter, kind of as a little bit of a joke, but he was a big, beautiful mainframe 10, the most dominant buck that I recorded last season. And I think I recorded him for 232 total hours on that one particular deer. And in total, I recorded 44 deer, 44 different mature bucks. So, yeah, no, and kind of the process is just going out in the morning, locating him, whether he's bedding or moving, early in the morning, right before light. And then, let's say in this story he's bedding, then I would mark that as a time event that he's bedding, and I would document 25, 26 variables dependent upon kind of what's happening, where he's bedding, the wind direction where he's bedding, potential thermals where he's bedding, which I can actually see with a thermal drone, by the way. So I'm not going to get into that. And all these other little variables, also with the direction that he's facing, all that, just anything you could think about, I was documenting it. And then as soon as he stood up, then I would mark that as a time event. And then as soon as that time event took place, then now he was moving. And then I would document another 26 to 27, something like that, variables dependent upon him moving. And then as soon as he beds back down, I would mark that he bedded back down, timestamp it. And then same thing. You just keep repeating this process all day long. And that's the main gist of what I was doing. And then after the fact, this is why it took so long for me to get a video out until June, because all of that stuff I was recording in field. I just had a laptop or a tablet with me, and I was documenting it. But after the fact is whenever I went back and I watched all of the video, all of the content that I was recording, because I was trying to record everything the entire time. I would go back and watch it all, and I would try to piece out these little intricacies that maybe I didn't notice the first time. So maybe when he was bedding here, he decided to kind of spin his head back in a different direction, and then he stood up and he spun around, and he bedded back down. And it's like, I don't know if that's a thing, but I'm going to document it. So I was trying to document every little piece that I could see. And I mean, I like for the, just like an example as to the level of intricacies that I was going to in terms of what I was documenting. I documented defecation frequency for per deer, per mature mature buck that I was studying all season long. And that's something that's probably never going to make it to the limelight of YouTube. But that is something that, like, just to show on the research level as to what I was researching, I was documenting every little detail that I possibly could.
No matter where your pursuits take you, no matter the quarry, there's always an element of chance.
Deer.
But skill is more reliable than luck.
I feel like we're in a pretty good position. We're just gonna have to wait.
The most trusted archery authority, Bowhunter TV. Watch now on Outdoor Channel, Sportsman Channel, and My Outdoor TV.
Let me ask you this. I mean, this is a really basic question compared to a lot of the stuff that you just mentioned, but how easy how easy is it with the drone? You know, maybe this is more of a technology question, but how easy is it day after day after day to literally take the drone up and find that individual deer?
Yeah,
Can it
not
be
as easy.
hard?
Not as
Yeah.
easy as you might think, and that's why I only have one deer that I've recorded for over 200 hours, is because he happened to be a deer that was very core and central, like all which, I mean, he traveled really far all the time, but he stayed in this general area. Sometimes I would fly up and the deer would just be completely gone that day, and I couldn't find him. And, like maybe I was researching one deer for 3 days in a row, and I wanted to go and find him again. Then I would go out the next day and I couldn't find him, and it's like, well, there goes that. And then there was one example where I actually went in and intentionally bumped a deer. I drove in, and every time I drive in, park at the cabin, I fly up the drone, and I turn around the drone. I look back at my location because oftentimes there's deer bedded within 50 yards of the cabin. And one of the mature bucks was bedded right on the edge of the field. He watched me drive in. He was just laying there. And it's like, oh, well, this could be interesting. So I just walked around the cabin, acted like I was filling up water, like kind of at the hydrant outside. And then I kind of moseyed out in his direction. And then I walked, and he stood up and he bumped down the field. And then I walked back to the cabin and I flew up the drone, and I watched him and observed where he went, how far I bumped him away. It was like 250 to 350 yards. And kind of his behaviors, it took him 30 minutes to 45 minutes to cool back down. Throughout that time frame, he bumped away from me and he was looking back in the direction that the event had just taken place, and he was kind of waiting to see if something was coming towards him, and nothing was. So he cooled back down and he just went back to browsing, and he's kind of lingering out in this big clear cut area. But I came back the next day because I wanted to track him again to see what his behavior was going to be like post being bumped, and couldn't find him. He was completely gone. And I'm like, well, is there a correlation there? Like, did he come, because he hadn't been off the property in a long time, and then all of a sudden he's off the property, and it's like, did he bump off the property because of me, or is his range just off the property and I didn't realize it? So little things like that where I can't answer that question, and I wish that I could in that situation. But yeah, no, if you have a deer leave the property, then I mean, I don't have access to every piece and every little piece of private land around me to go and fly it with.
Yeah. What are the rules on that? Are you allowed to put your drone up and go over anywhere you want?
Yeah, I mean, legally, no one owns the airspace, so technically, I could fly over everybody's private land. But whenever you're out in the middle of nowhere and you start risking the idea of treating the airspace as if it's yours, and you fly it over these people's properties, the odds of getting your drone shot down are everlastingly increasing. I mean, it's a very
Well, and
stupid thing to
it's
do.
just
Yeah.
it's just not good for neighborly relations either, right?
No,
Because
no, it's not. Yeah.
your family, like you said, your family's from there, right? You grew up in that
Yeah.
area, so you don't want to piss off
Well,
all your
and
neighbors.
the drone sounds like a helicopter. It looks like a helicopter. I mean, it's a very intrusive looking device whenever you
Is
see
it
it at
big?
400
It's
foot.
really big.
Yeah, the main one that I used last season, it is a really big drone, and it makes quite a bit of noise, and that's actually an issue that you run into where you're trying to avoid potentially bumping deer with the drone where they can hear it. So it took me a while from kind of June, July, and August where I was flying a lot, trying to find what range spook deer, trying to find exactly what
Yeah.
range they would start to recognize me at. And then I have a laser rangefinder on the drone, so I can turn that rangefinder on and see the exact distance that I am at any moment in time.
Is that
So I was
built
always
in, or
able to.
did you add that?
No, that's already on the drone. Yeah.
And so how big? You said it's big. I don't know what that means. How much does this
Yeah.
drone weigh?
You can pull it out. I mean, it's like
Oh, so it's
probably,
not that big. I was
yeah,
thinking when you
it's like
said
2 foot
big, I'm
by
like,
2 foot. Yeah.
you said helicopter. I'm like, is this thing as big as like a
Oh no.
Volkswagen Beetle or something?
Yeah, they make drones that big, but no, I mean, it's still a really loud drone though. I mean, in comparison to the new one that I've been flying, it's the DJI 4T. It's like a little Mavic Pro, like the smaller DJIs from back in the day, just fold out, little
Yeah.
props and everything, and it's way quieter, a lot smaller, a lot easier. This one's very enterprise level. You can fly it in like, I think it's rated for 25-mile-per-hour winds, but I've flown it in 45-mile-per-hour winds while it was like sleeting and it was 5 degrees outside.
Oh
So
wow.
it's that drone is an absolute beast
So
of a machine.
so what did you find then with your rangefinder? Like what's roughly sort of the bubble, if you will, for like not bothering the deer?
Yeah, yeah. For me in hill country, well, there's a lot of variables that you have to look at beforehand as well. But let's just say it's like a standard day, and maybe we have like a 5 to 8 mile per hour, steady wind, and there's leaves off the trees in this situation. Leaves on the trees, you can actually get a little closer, and sounds being kind of depressed by that a little bit. But
Hmm.
if leaves are off the trees and it's a steady wind, in hill country, you can get like 450 to 550 foot away. Whereas on ag land, where it's a lot flatter, you can only get 850-ish, 800 foot away, kind of that range. So generally on ag land, you're staying further away. In hill country, you can get a little bit closer. If you have high winds, if you have rain, something that's causing noise, you can get significantly closer in those situations. That's where, like, if you ever see in the videos that I've made where I have like a super close up shot where it just looks like I'm right on top of him, it's because I
Hmm.
am right on top of him. And it's because there's like a 25-mile-per-hour wind and maybe inclement weather, maybe not. Maybe there's leaves still on the trees and they're rustling, making noise. And I'm able to realize that so that I can get close and not bump him. Because I have one video, it's actually my first one, where I recorded a buck and he was asleep and his head was slowly falling as he's falling asleep and he's tucking it into his body. It's a really cool clip. And you can actually see a leaf blow by because it was actually really windy that day and leaves were falling. So, but I was able to realize that and basically piece together like he's not going to detect me if I get closer. So
Now, what about talk about the cameras that are on the drone too? Because, like you said, even when you're 800 feet away, you can zoom in enough to really identify these individual deer, and you can see them pretty well.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you have a wide camera, which is just kind of your standard drone camera. Then you have the thermal camera, which is how you're able to locate everything. But then you can flip on the zoom camera, and that's kind of where all the magic happens is with the zoom camera. And the big one that I'm using, I only know the specs on it, but it's I think it's 18x optical zoom, so 18x zoom for really really high clarity whenever you're zooming in. And then beyond that, it goes all the way to like 200x digital, but you could also post crop that as well in post production. So most of the video that I do takes place at 18x at the highest optical zoom that you can possibly go, unless I'm trying to do something creative, then I'll back it out. But yeah, I mean you can zoom in really tight from these ranges. If you get out 800 foot, 900 foot, everything's going to get pretty grainy pretty fast. But if you can get in close and you're on 18x, you can count points on top of their head. You can count points on their base. Some cases you can count eyelashes if you get close enough. So
What do you have in terms of like battery life too, and like flying time, and obviously, I would think that temperature has a big impact on that as well.
it can, yeah. Temperature, wind. There's a lot of things that'll create variables in terms of how efficient your batteries are. And then on top of that, the batteries that I use, I'll just use my M30T as an example because it's the one that I used last season. I'm still getting used to the 4T, but the M30T, it takes two batteries to run it. Those batteries are $430 a piece. So in the end, after tax and everything, you're looking at about $1,000 a set, every single set that you're wanting to fly with. And a set, whenever you plug them into the drone, it generally lasts around 30 minutes to 40. I've had them last 45 minutes. They're actually not even, I don't think they're rated for that, but I've had them last that in really, really kind of subtle weather. But oftentimes I'm getting 30 to 35 minutes flight time with that. And then whenever you max out to your flight time, then you turn around, fly back, and land it. And the cool thing about this drone over the 4T is you can take out one battery and slide in the next, so basically there's two on the back of it. You take out one on the right hand side, you slide back in your new one, and then you take out your one on the left, and then you slide back in your new one. and the drone never has to power off. So as soon as those batteries are back in, you can take it off and fly it up again, which allows you to never have to reset anything. It's a continuous flight path. Where like with the 4T, you do have to pull the battery out of the back completely and kills the drone. You put the new battery back in, you have to power it back on, wait on that. And then the other really fascinating thing about the 30T and why I'd been using it so much last season was because the two batteries that you're using to fly with, they charge at the same exact rate that the current batteries that you're using in your drone discharge at. So they charge up to 90% in like 28 or 29, 30 minutes. And that
Gotcha.
allows you to fly all day long with two sets of batteries.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
And
so you don't have to have 8 sets of batteries.
correct. Which
Yeah.
I mean, by this point, with how many hours I've flown, they last 400. They last 400 cycles, which I think is like 233 hours total of flight time. And yeah, I mean, I've gone through quite a few sets of batteries, but actually, all of the ones that I have, even my really old ones, they still work. They just some of them, the like light indicators on the back of them don't function like they should. And I actually almost crashed the drone one time due to there was a lightning strike that happened, and then all of a sudden my flight time went from like 8 minutes to 30 seconds, and it just started blaring at me like landing, landing, landing.
Oh,
And I
wow.
looked straight down. And I was flying over timber. I didn't know where to go, and I seen a power line. So I flew over to the power line, and I picked out a spot in between the power line and in between the the wood edge, and it was maybe, I don't know, 3 foot, 5 foot wide, and I was 390 foot up AGL, and I went over the spot, looked straight down, I lost connection to the drone. And then I was just like, well, either it landed right perfectly where I had it, or it landed right into a power line or something. And we drove up to it, and it had dropped perfectly right in between the power line, right in between the wood edge, and landed itself. And so I put a new set of batteries into it, took it back up, and continued what I was doing. So
Well, I'll tell you what, it's often said in life, you can do just about anything as long as you have enough time and money. And it's obvious that when we talk with Derrick here, everything he's doing with Whitetail Research requires a lot of both. He's putting in an incredible expenditure of his time and resources into this. And before we continue our conversation, I just want to remind everybody that the Bowhunter podcast is brought to you by Lancaster Archery Supply. For all your bow hunting needs, visit lancasterarchery.com. They've got the gear, they've got the knowledge, they've got the passion, and they would gladly take some of your money. Derrick's spending all his on drones and batteries and gas for his truck, but Lancaster Archery will take some and sell you some bow hunting stuff so that you can watch Derrick's videos, and then you can try and take those new goodies you got from Lancaster Archery and go figure out that buck you've been chasing. So Derrick, what are, people have really got to check out your videos to get the full message, but like, quick hit. We talked about some really fascinating stuff about the October lull, and I thought that was great. Like, chances are the buck that you want to kill right now is somewhere on an oak tree, not moving very far, and getting in there and killing him is probably not going to be easy. That's great insight. What are some of the other insights? Like, what are some of the most surprising things that you've seen? Have you been able to draw any broad conclusions, from a bow hunting standpoint, just things like that. Some, three or four bullet points of like, man, I saw this, I learned that really stick out to you when you think about everything you've done to this point.
yeah, I mean, one of my favorite ones to bring up is the relation of deer bedding and on the leeward side of the ridge, and then everything kind of really just the whole belief system of deer utilizing the wind. That just that core topic, and how that pertains to bedding, and how they move, and how they enter into a feeding zone, and all these different situations, and how they scent check does and whatnot. And I just wasn't able to see, and mind you, all of my research that I've done, it's, I observe things, and then it's kind of down to me to piece together what I'm seeing, and make it into a story as to what I believe is happening. It's like, even though I'm watching these deer do what they're doing, I have to be able to piece that together and come up with an answer. So in the end, like, still technically, a lot of these things that I say are my theories just based off of what I've seen. Nothing is really just set in stone factual at the moment, just because I don't have enough data for it. But anyways, the things that I started noticing though was in terms of deer bedding on the leeward side of the ridge, it just wasn't happening near at the frequency that a lot of people would have thought, in my opinion. Going into it, I was expecting to see it very consistently. You have a cold front moving in, bedding on the leeward side of the ridge, but I'd seen multiple times where there's kind of heavy inclement weather, or a harsh cold front moving in, and a mature buck in particular is bedded on the windward side of the ridge. And my favorite example is it was 25-mile-per-hour wind, and it's sleeting ice that entire time frame. And he's bedded on the windward side of the ridge, and he's facing the storm. He's not tucked away from it. He doesn't have his head tucked into his body while it's sleeting ice. He is actually on the windward side of the ridge, facing the storm, and ice is just piling on his antlers. And it was like, what in the world are you doing at that moment in time? And then I started noticing and this is really, I'd seen a lot of times where they're not bedding on the leeward side of the ridge, but this is when I really realized that I don't think wind was playing as much of a role in terms of where they were bedding as a lot of people could think. And this particular deer, he was bedded, and I've seen it multiple times, but he was bedded in a thermal hub, and he was on the windward side of a thermal hub. It was a south wind, so he's on a south facing slope, and he was maybe, I don't know, on the bottom third of that area, kind of typical for where a deer would bed in a thermal hub. And once again, on the windward side with the south wind. South wind was 3 to 5 miles per hour. And a wind shift was happening that day because a big cold front was moving in. And in theory, in this situation, with that wind shifting from a south wind around to a north wind, at that moment in time, he would have been in the perfect location. Not only is he in a thermal hub, but now he's on the leeward side of the ridge, kind of protected from this cold front and this inclement weather that's moving in, and that would put him in a really good situation. But he's still shifted with the wind shift, and that's something that I observed a lot, where there would be a midday wind shift and deer getting up and moving dependent upon that wind shift. And that is a correlation with wind initially for me, thinking that, okay, so they do use wind to their advantage, like pretty heavily. But why was this deer that was on the windward side of a ridge in a thermal hub relocating just because the wind shifted from a south wind to a north wind? And the only thing that I could piece together was one, that north wind was going to be 10 to 15 miles per hour. So it was a little bit more volatile for thermals. And whenever he relocated, I think where he relocated to, he may have still, he somewhat of a leeward side of the ridge. He wasn't really, he was kind of on the side of it. But still, whenever he relocated, my theory is that he was relocating dependent upon where he was wanting to be that evening. So he had already known in his mind, based on the conditions that he was being given with the south wind, this slow, steady south wind, that he was going to go to this particular location over here. But then as soon as the conditions had changed dramatically, and now he's got this really harsh north wind coming in, and that's going to be kind of disrupting and very volatile towards thermals, then he got up and he completely relocated his area. He moved like 1,200 yards and then bedded back down and then made his evening movement dependent on that. And I'd seen that multiple times where deer were completely relocating their area on a wind shift. And I was struggling to piece it together to the fact that they're actually moving because of the wind, and they're wanting to readjust their bedding area as much as it is that they're trying to relocate because they're attempting to make their evening travel route better in terms of what, safer, whatever they're doing. And there is a correlation with wind there, but I think that it's more so with thermals in that case.
Yeah, it's fascinating because, like I think about my friend Clint Casper from Ohio, and he's a big one where he will chart out the wind. When will a buck show up at a particular location? And, only, if it's a southwest wind, that's when I'm getting pictures of him. But what you're saying really maybe not calls into question, because, he's had some success with that, but maybe just makes it, the whole discussion, so much bigger, because now you're introducing like this idea of, conscious thought and planning into the equation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, whereas Clint would say, well, if the wind isn't right, I wouldn't even expect to see this buck in this particular field or food plot that night, because he's not going to, use that travel path, because that's how he comes here when it's, say, a southwest wind. Whereas what you're saying is, well, if that buck really if he normally, beds over here and comes here, but the wind shifts, now you're saying, hey, he might come, he still wants to be here at night. So he's getting up and he's going to move way over here so that he can still come there. And it's like, man, it complicates the whole equation inside my
Yeah.
head of like how we try
Yeah,
to
and
figure all
and
that out.
and one thing that I haven't been able to piece together is like if he's actually relocating to make it to the same area that he had predetermined to go to, or if he's just completely scratching that idea altogether and moving to a completely different location. From what I'm seeing, I think they're moving to a completely they're basically
Yeah.
wherever they wanted to be that evening. It's just kind of like X that off because we can't do that anymore, and we're moving to a completely different area.
Yeah. And see,
But there have been
that would make
yeah
more sense if you think about like what Clint talks about with trying to pattern the wind for particular bucks, because then that would make sense, right? Like
yeah
if it's a southwest wind, you've got a good chance of maybe ambushing them at that location that night. But if it's a different wind, no, I don't have any data, at least any camera data to indicate that you're going to see them there, which again, it still introduces this idea of like, hey, these bucks they're not just robots that are responding to the environmental conditions. Yes, they have instincts and they are responding to environmental conditions, but you got to combine that with the fact that they also have a brain. And so, like you said, it's like they know, I mean, I'm sure it's not just the bucks, it's all the deer, right? They know within a given area, I've got, 12 or 20 or 50 or however many it is places that I can bed, that many places that I can feed, and that many different routes that I can take to
yeah
get there, and then trying to decipher all those pieces to the puzzle is going
hmm
to be a lifetime of work for you. So you'll
yeah
never put yourself out of a job, right?
Yeah, no, definitely not. And that, I mean, that in itself is one of the main ideas I've been trying to figure out, and it's going to be a mega multi-year project, but is trying to actually figure out how deep of a thinker, like how intelligent are white-tailed deer, how smart are these animals. And you have the perspective of that where I'm thinking and theorizing that, well, maybe in some situations they have predetermined locations in their mind as to where they want to be, like even in a morning travel route when they're bedded. It almost seems as if they know that they want to move from point A and they want to go all the way over here to point B in that situation. So it's like in my experience, that I view that as a sign of intelligence. They seem pretty intelligent. But then on the flip side of it, for me as a hunter, I know many situations where I've shot a doe and then she'll run and she'll die on the edge of the field, kind of in this food plot, because I'm just hunting over a food plot to kill a doe in this instance. And then another doe walks in and she just walks right over to that doe, sniffs her, kind of realizes like, oh, you're dead. Like, oh, that's interesting. And then just keeps browsing in the food plot like nothing ever happened. And it's like, well, that's a sign that you're maybe not that intelligent. So like trying to piece together like how intelligent actually are these animals. And maybe in that
Well,
situation, it's just like well, it's nature and sometimes deer die. So like it's not that big of a deal. But yeah, still trying to piece all of those variables together and determine how intelligent they are.
well, and even if you are intelligent, like you said at the beginning of the show, you like to think that you're relatively intelligent. I mean, we all like to think we're relatively intelligent, and so you know we are, right, humans, we're the most intelligent of all the animals, right? But at the same time, so we can say, okay, we got a plan and we're smart and we got our mind focused, and we're not going to do certain things, but then you go end up, you're at a bar with some buddies, and you had a couple drinks and you got distracted by this girl and you end up doing a whole bunch of stuff that wasn't a part of your plan. And so the same thing, like think about it. Yeah, a buck could be very intelligent, but and he might be going, his intention is to go from point A to point B, but it's the first week of November, and halfway between point A and point B, he either finds a hot doe or just hits a scent trail or something, and all of a sudden, his plan is out the window and he takes a left-hand turn,
Yeah.
and maybe he gives up the wind or something, and he puts himself in a vulnerable situation, and all of a sudden he's in front
hmm
of your tree. And we
Yeah.
could try to find data to make sense of all that, but maybe the sense of it is that there is no sense, that buck would almost never be in that spot, and you could have hunted there 364 other days that year and never seen that buck. You just happened to kill him there because it was November 6th.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's definitely also, I mean, not only in rifle season, like for Missouri, the rifle season's kind of engineered around what's supposed to be peak rut. Oftentimes it falls within somewhere in peak rut, sometimes post rut, etc. But for the most part, rutting activity is definitely happening in that time frame, and that's why in those opening days of rifle season, not only do they have a greater weapon in their hand that they can just shoot 150, 250 yards and lay down a deer, but mature bucks are making a ton of mistakes in that time frame because they're just as dumb as a rock, because their mindset and their goals have completely shifted, obviously, to does and estrus. And that kind of brings it back to what you had said in terms of intersecting trails. And that was one of the other, probably my third point that I was going to mention that's interesting in terms of wind, because I'd entered it as well, kind of looking at the idea that deer moving downwind of doe bedding areas or downwind of feeding zones and just constantly attempting to utilize the wind to scent check areas. And I didn't really believe that moving into it, just because I'd been hunting for a while and I'd seen a lot of these kind of intersecting trails happening with known beaten down doe trails. And it's like, well, that's quite obviously a mature buck moving through that area. And then obviously put that to work as a bow hunter and killed some deer off of it. But to see it with a drone and to see how efficiently a mature buck's able to travel across a section of terrain and scent check, 30, 40 does in a less than a 3/4 mile of a travel route is ridiculously cool, because he's just walking along that area and he's walking these intersecting doe trails, scent checking the ground the entire time. That's all he's doing. And if he makes it to an intersection where a bunch of does had moved by and something piques his interest, he stops in that location, he kind of lifts his head, and then he'll kind of hook back off of his trail and walk back towards where the does are. And I've seen it multiple times. The first time I saw it with my drone, I actually didn't know what he was doing because he seemed very steady in the direction he was going. And then all of a sudden he just completely hooked off of it. And it's like, well, where are you going, buddy? And I flipped back to my thermal image camera on my controller, and I could see that he was walking in on about a group of 8 does in that situation. It was like, whoa, that was pretty cool. Like, you found those guys pretty efficiently. And whenever he was walking up on them, he never got within 30 yards, and he was just walking back and forth, scent checking the ground the entire time. And then he had got a good enough whiff of whatever he was trying to scent check, and he'd realized it wasn't good enough. So he hooked back, walked exactly back, right back to the trail that he'd hooked off of in the beginning, and then continued his trek and just kept walking on. And throughout that travel route, that was in early November, I think, last year, he had done that multiple times in that travel route where he'd hooked off and he'd went and checked a group of does, and then he walked back to his trail and he continued on. But whenever he was checking does, he never went downwind. He's always on their trail every single time. And his entire travel route, he was intersecting doe trails all throughout the area. And it was really, really impressive.
That's what you just said is amazing insight. He never went downwind to check those does. He was on their trail. That tells me, everybody thinks of a rutting buck with his nose up a doe's rear end, right? Smelling and maybe even licking, whatever. But that tells me that there's something in the interdigital scent that probably indicates receptiveness or something too, because it's not like a doe, an estrus doe, is just constantly putting down a trail of urine on the path that she walks, right? But she's putting her hoofs on the ground over and over again. And there's got to be something.
Yeah, which they have scent glands in their hoofs.
Exactly.
Well.
Yeah, the interdigital. That's what I mean. So even the interdigital scent of an estrus doe must be discernible to a buck. And so they don't necessarily have to worry about the wind direction. When you see a buck, and we all see it, in the rut, when you see a buck, I call it like, that's when those bucks are on a mission. A lot of times those are the bucks you can't grunt them in, you can't rattle them in. You see those bucks, they're passing, say 80 yards out. They're out of bow range. You really desperately, it's a great buck. You get excited, your heart, your adrenaline's dumping into your blood. You desperately want to get that buck to come 40 yards closer, and you hit him with a grunt or a snort wheeze. Maybe he stops, he kind of looks over, but he's like, nah, man, like I'm doing my route right now. And he just puts his nose back on the ground and he goes,
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a situation too where they will utilize the wind to their advantage whenever they hear something. And versus in that situation, kind of circling back to try to find whatever was rattling or whatever, whatever was fighting or whatever made a grunt call, trying to find their scent trail. He just comes straight in, or in some situations he'll try to wrap downwind, but in a really aggressive situation he'll come straight in. But that is a scenario where they will utilize the wind to their advantage, is just try to get downwind of that activity. And I think that's where that example that hunters have had experience with is where we've started theorizing the whole idea that they utilize wind a lot more than they actually do. And just because they will do that in a situation like that, where they think there's a buck in a particular area and they're just trying to get downwind and figure out who they are before they kind of move into it and pursue it. Whereas in some situations, if you have a buck and he is the bee's knees, he is the dominant buck in the area, and he hears activity in his area, he doesn't give a crap. He's just walking straight into you. He's just that's whenever you find those bucks, the ones that think they're the most dominant buck in the area, they'll just come straight to you. They don't wrap downwind. They don't anything. It's like, if you're in my area, I'm going to knock you on your butt, and those bucks will come straight to you. So, I had a different thought, but I've moved off that trail. So,
well, I think another reason why we obsess over the wind and think that the deer always use it in every situation to its advantage is simple. Why do bow hunters obsess over the wind? It's because we know.
Yeah.
It's because we've been busted so many times, and we know
the wind is massively important as a hunter.
You know what I mean? It's like I knew yesterday, like I told you that little story. Like, first it was the fawn. It was a doe and a fawn, and the fawn was along the edge of the corn. And I didn't know the doe was there. And the fawn hit my scent stream and locked up. And I was like, all right. I was like, but it's just a fawn, and fawns don't normally blow a lot. They don't get as worked. I'm like, she'll probably just leave eventually. But then the snort came out of the corn, and it was like, and then that giant doe comes around. It's like, that's why, because we just know it's like, there's nothing worse when you're sitting in your tree and you're like, okay, here comes some deer, but it's not, it's just a bunch of does. There's nothing I want to shoot or whatever. And you wish, like, oh, I wish these deer could just get past me and go about their day, because I'm not going to, cause them any harm. But it's like, you see where they're walking. You're like, okay, in 20 yards, they're going to hit it. And it's like, boom. And then the whole show starts, the head bopping and the stomping and all that. And you're like, oh my God.
Yeah. And that's when I fling an arrow at a Karen from 40 yards away, straight through her jugular. So,
yeah. So yeah, that's why we think the wind is the end all and be all, because it's typically the death of us, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, gosh, I mean, this is so fascinating, and we're like coming up on time, and we've got to wrap this up. And I'm like, no, man, like I got to do like a multi-part series or something with this guy and have him back. But I got to ask one more question, I guess, before we wrap it up, because I don't want to waste your whole day. And I think I know the answer, but maybe I don't. Have you, or do you ever plan to? And I don't know how this would work. You'd almost have to get a special permit, because, there's regulations about using drones directly for hunting. And gosh, that's a whole thing we didn't even get into, is like the ethical implications. But I'm like,
yeah, we can get into it if you want. I don't mind.
How cool would it be to actually use the drone to observe bow hunters hunting, where you have no connection? In other words, let's say you were going to observe me. We're not going to have any communication. We're not texting each other. You're not sharing live information with me. You're literally just doing like a big brother observation, where like, okay, Christian's going over here to this farm. This is the stand that he's decided to go hunt today because he thinks this is the spot to be. So Christian drives in, he parks his truck, he gets out, he walks in on whatever route he chooses to walk in. He gets in the tree. He thinks this is where the big buck is going to be. But guess what? Christian doesn't know. Think about this is like made for television stuff here.
It'd be really cool if somebody did this, Christian.
Yeah, it'd be really cool.
It's almost like there might be a video getting posted this Friday on this exact topic.
This would be so cool. cool because it's like, okay, Christian thinks he's hot stuff because he's in this tree and he just know, what Christian doesn't know is that buck either saw him walk in or smelled him, or no, that buck is bedded over here a half a mile away and he's feeding in a completely different area. And Christian's an idiot. And we've just showed that to a million people on YouTube. Congratulations. Yeah.
I mean, I'll spoil a little bit of the example that I'm going to be using for the hill country part of this video, but basically, I did that. I did that last season, and there are technically laws and the legality of a lot of this stuff is still up in the air. In Missouri, you cannot use one in a hunting application. So if you want to go use it to actually hunt a deer, you cannot do that. And I don't remember the exact time frames on it because I wasn't hunting deer, so I wasn't trying to follow whatever the guidelines were exactly. But and then the other portion of it is you're not allowed to harass deer with this type of technology, which I completely agree with. And cycling back to this story, though, there's really no regulation on what you had just said. And for that, I had entered it with them. And I even, this video, I have a massive disclaimer at the beginning that there are a lot of thoughts and processes that had gone through my brain in terms of the ethicality of utilizing a drone in this particular situation. So I went to kind of the upteenth degree to make sure that what I was doing was as ethical as possible. And the process that I'd done whenever we'd entered it was basically finding a hunter that was willing to let me fly the drone on his property while he was going to go out and try to access his stand. I was also really interested in access. So a hunter gaining access to his stand and observing the deer bump around him. And basically someone that's okay with me coming in and flying, observing them gain access to their stand, and then also kind of observing their property and how deer move around in that particular situation. But throughout that, basically whenever I contacted them, the idea is you need to have a predetermined location that you're going to be going to and you're going to be hunting on the day that I come out. So you're going to be hunting this location, no questions asked. This is whatever you decide. I've never flown this property before, and I'll just show up and I'll fly it, and then you're going to go to that spot. So that's what we did is I showed up, and then they took off in their truck. And their idea was they were going to drive 2/3 of the way there around in a truck to intentionally bump out these deer along their travel route with the truck. And then they were going to pull an e-bike out of the back of the truck. And this guy was going to ride an e-bike into his stand. It's a strategy they've used before, and they feel like they've had pretty good success with it. So they were going to try it again, and I was going to observe it. And I didn't care what they were doing. I just wanted to record, what the deer were reacting on based off of this. So the interesting part about it, though, was they did bump a lot of deer whenever they moved in, and they'd seen some of them whenever they were driving through, and they'd recognized them. But whenever they made it to the point where they dropped out their e-bike, all of those deer that they had bumped, they'd shoved them all to where they were still within range of them. All these deer were within 150 yards of them. And then they pulled the e-bike out of the back of their truck, and all the deer are sitting there just watching them. They have no idea these deer are watching them. They think they just bumped them out of the area. And then this guy, he had deer to his west, and then the main deer that they bumped were to his east. And he got out on the e-bike, and he drove the e-bike up a little bit north, kind of northwest, and then he circled back to the east. And whenever he drove his e-bike up that road, and the truck turned around and drove away, all of the bucks, it was a group of 3 bucks. They were younger, but they were to the west. All of those deer waited for that e-bike to drive up, and whenever he was 50 yards out of the way, they all just came running down right behind him. They ran right exactly where the truck and the e-bike just were. They ran right behind him, and they went over to those deer that were all kind of pulled over to the east, and they all stayed in that section that entire evening. And it was pretty interesting, though, to see all of those deer observing him, and then in their mentality, they're kind of being sneaky at this point, pulling out the e-bike, and nothing's detecting us. And then he gets on the e-bike and he rides in, and there were actually some deer pretty close to a stand, around 250 to 300 yards where they got the e-bike out of the back of the truck. And those deer had no idea that he just accessed it. But all of those deer that they had bumped and shoved around with the truck, gaining access, every one of those deer saw him get on the e-bike, and all of them stayed away from the area that he drove in that evening, which was pretty cool to see.
It's not, you and I had talked about this, in our previous call when we set this show up. It's like I mentioned it at the beginning, there's knowing all the sort of I'll call it wild observation, the observations, whatever you want to call it, that you can do with your drone. But then when you put yourself in that landscape, it changes everything. So yeah, I mean, that's a situation. Then then that actually begs more questions than it answers, because it gives you an answer about what happened that night. But then the question would be, if we could actually let's say we could put a GPS collar on every single one of those deer, because you had a bunch, several different bucks, um, probably a dozen does or something like that. eh, How long did they avoid that area? And then maybe the answer would become, well, some deer avoided it longer than others. They didn't all do the same thing. And then the question would become, well, how do you figure out how
Which
long a
ones are gonna
particular
live?
deer? And
Yeah.
it just goes and it goes and it goes and it goes. And it's like, we're never going to figure all this stuff out there.
Yeah, no, they're highly complex, and I mean, on the flip side of that, you can go to like an ag property where I've done another study similar to it, and those deer you can drive an e-bike or probably walk or run, or you can do whatever you want to right down the middle of them wherever they're browsing and feeding, and then you can come back the next day and all of those deer will be right back in that area pretty much. And even the mature bucks will be pretty close into that location. So it also becomes property specific. It becomes
Yeah.
pressure specific, and like there's so many different variables that add into it. And all of my studies on this particular property may only apply to 5% of the people viewing it, whereas these guys, they hunt really high pressured public, or they hunt a super low pressured ag property. It's so different.
Well, and yeah, I mean, and here's another example. Like I have an e-bike. By the way, if anyone's looking for an e-bike, check out the Velatric Nomad X2. I just got one of those this year. It's an awesome bike. But so I've been using this e-bike over at this farm. Now, when I came out last night, I was hunting up top. I got to come down along the edge of the farm. Now, I bumped some deer, but my question is this. Now, do I think it's better to bump deer on the e-bike than walking, just because that I want to believe that? Or do the deer really know that it's a person on an e-bike, or do they just see this thing come zooming along and they just run out of the way because that's what they do,
Mm.
and because in here, and then I get trail camera data. Like there was a 3 deer that I went right past on the e-bike, and they button hooked. They started to run away, and then they buttoned through this little hedgerow and came back. And I almost hit the last one in line, because they button hooked right in front of me and ran in the woods as I was zooming down the hill last night.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know for sure if it was those same deer, but I'm telling you, there were like 8 or 9. I have a camera right there. There were like 8 or 9 deer all over that camera for a long time last night, like shortly after dark. So I'm like, yeah, I startled those deer, but like, I know I didn't blow all the deer out of the area. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And so I don't know, like that'd be a whole nother project you could do.
Yeah.
Like, isn't
Yeah.
is an e-bike truly a better access method than walking?
Yeah, no, I think as long as you're on a property that has a lot of human pressure on it, with whether that human pressure is people walking on, just public, or if you're in a situation where you're on an ag property and there's a lot of just human activity taking place on it. Guy driving his UTV to, bring feed or whatever to the cattle, or he's going and messing around with something over here, or fixing a fence over here, or maybe they're cutting corn on this day, or, all this different activity that's going on. I think you can get away with a ton more on properties like that than you can on like a desolate hill country property where there's just not much human activity. And then all of a sudden there's something that's added to the equation that they're not used to. I think that spooks them a lot harder than just from what I've seen. But once again,
Yeah.
I don't have enough data on that.
No,
So
I agree with you. I mean, like, there's tractors and combines and all kinds of stuff regular, on this farm, and they probably blow it off, relatively quicker. And I think the e-bike, look, I'm lazy. I like the e-bike because it saves me sweat. But I mean, I think the ground scent is a huge part of the e-bike. I think
yeah,
I don't think you leave much of a trail when you just roll through on your rubber tires, as opposed to actually walking everywhere.
yeah,
So
no, I
I think
completely
that
agree.
I think there's some advantage to it, and
Yeah.
and actually, everyone touts. Gosh, this is a whole rabbit trail, but everyone touts the quietness of the e-bike. But I'm not sure that's always an advantage. I think it's an
Mhm.
advantage when you're going in, but a lot of times I actually think when you're coming out, especially if you're coming out right at dark, like I was last night. So that's when it's the trickiest, right? I mean, when you're coming out in ag country right at dark, that's when all the deer are coming out of the cover. And so what you're going to have right at that time, and I even observed it with some other deer lower that I didn't spook, that I just stopped and watched with my binoculars. They were coming out of another patch of woods at the bottom of the hill into a cut bean field. They're concentrated along the edge there because it's not late enough yet that they've made it out into the middle of the fields. So you're literally, the deer are coming out right where you're going out. And I wish actually this would be another interesting like experiment. What if you could actually make a loud engine sound on your e-bike at night? Because I'd rather push them off before I get there, like 300 yards. I'd rather have them get out of the way, hear me coming. I don't want them to hear me coming going in. But if I'm coming out in the dark, I want them to hear me coming from like 300 yards away.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, I mean, yeah, no, this is something I recommended to some people is getting like a little Bluetooth speaker, like a JBL. Some e-bikes actually have speakers built into them, like Bluetooth speakers. But if you don't have that, then getting one of those little Bluetooth speakers, like a little JBL or something like that, and just, zip tying it to the front of your bike and keeping it charged every once in a while. And turn that thing on. Have something on your phone, whether you want an engine sound or you want to play just really loud, just anything. So that way the deer know you're coming, and then just blare that stinking speaker as you drive your e-bike through the woods. And I think it's actually a pretty good way to do exactly what you were just stating. And I think it has minimal effects versus kind of sneaking up on and spooking deer in a situation where they're not expecting to have something come in and bump them.
Because you're so quiet, you're literally within like 50 yards of them by the time they see you. And then they don't, like I said, I don't know if they really know if it's a person on a bike or if it's just like some crazy thing is coming, like zooming through here. What the hell's going on?
Yeah, and I definitely think that's a lot more applicable once again on those properties that have a lot of human activity, because they hear the JBL speaker blaring off whatever sound you want to run on it, and then it's just kind of like, oh, old farmer whatever is out doing something again. It's not a big deal to them, so they'll just bump out. Whereas once again, I would assume, I don't have data on it, but I would assume that on a property where they're not used to anything, and then all of a sudden a blaring speaker comes busting through the woods, then they're probably not going to like that. Whether or not you sneak up on them or you're making noise, I don't think they'll like it either way. So
I don't think they ever love any disturbance, but to your point, they're more tolerant of it. I mean, look, where I hunt, it's broken country, and you hear traffic, and it's not unusual to even like hear kids playing, or somebody yelling. Sometimes they're used, they're used to a certain amount of, they know there's people, around. But anyway, gosh, Derrick, I mean, we're way over time now. I got to wrap up this week's episode, but we've got to have you back because this is just fascinating stuff. And like, everyone's going to be scrambling to watch all your videos. I'm excited about these new videos that are coming out. And I think, like, I just have 1,000,001 ideas of things that we could do. And it's like, I'm like, man, how can we put a hunt together and get Derrick there? And like, seriously, because it would just be so funny because we could rip each other. Think about this. Think about even like coming back like every night and having Derrick do a little presentation. So like today we're going to look at Christian, but tomorrow we're going to look at Mark. And the day after that, we're going to look at Scott. So like, the first night everybody rips me because they're like, Berg, you had a crappy plan and all those deer had you figured. I'm like, okay, I'm the worst deer hunter in the world, but just have your fun now because tomorrow we're looking at you, buddy boy. And you may, or maybe Mark goes out the next day and he shoots a giant. And so it's like, let me show you how it's done. And Derrick's like, it's not just bragging. I've got all the footage to show how, Christian really muffed this, but Mark had a great plan because he had these deer fooled.
And here's how he executed it.
That'd be fantastic. Yeah. Oh, wow. I had a great time. Great conversation. Absolutely. This was one of the more enjoyable episodes I've done in quite some time. It was a pleasure.
I appreciate that. Thanks.
Well, with that, I will thank you. And like I said, we just wish you the continued success. I hope you continue to, find some time to do the actual hunting. I know you're engrossed in all this research, but get out there and punch some tags too.
Yeah, I think I'm going out tonight to try to kill a doe. So I've got some beef with those does on that ag property that blew me out on opening day. So think I'm going to go back out, and I don't care if they're at 50 yards or 60 yards, 70 yards. There's an arrow heading their direction tonight. So,
all right, well, go do that. Settle a score, and we will see everybody next time on the Bowhunter Podcast.
Thanks for downloading the Bowhunter Podcast. All bow hunting, all the time. Pick up the latest issue of Bowhunter Magazine on your local newsstand or connect with us online at bowhunter.com.